Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to do some very basic painting. We're going to use only a limited amount of color just to learn how to kind of apply acrylic paint. So this is what I have. I have a reference image. This is what we're going to be painting. I have a paper that has the circle already on here and the cast shadow. I've got 3 colors of paint. I have cobalt blue, white, and black. This is all acrylic paint. I've got a jar of water and I have 2 paintbrushes. So the paintbrushes that I chose are one small flat brush and one small, not too small, but a little small round brush. So this is what I'm going to use. I've got 2 paper towels. Don't bunch them up. Try to keep them flat like this on the table. I've got 2 just because they're going to get a little bit wet, and I want, if it goes through here, it'll hit that one. So I've got 2 paper towels. So I'm going to start with the lighter areas on the sphere. So when I'm mixing paint, I always start with the lighter shade of a color that I'm using. So for example, if I'm using like yellow and red and I'm going to mix them together, yellow is lighter than red, so I would scoop the yellow first. So if I'm mixing this over here, this is a very light blue. So to make that, I'm using white and blue. So I'm going to scoop some of the white out and I'm going to put it in a place where I can mix it. So I'm just going to put it here. Now I'm going to dip a little bit of my paintbrush in the corner, or just the corner of my paintbrush in the blue, and I got too much, so I'm going to wipe some of it off, and then I'm going to stir it up over here. So what I'm going for is a very light highlight, like right there, and then I'm just going to start applying paint. Now some of our paint is really thin, so you're going to have to go over it a couple of layers anyway. Let me talk you through what I'm doing. I'm using the flat edge of the brush up against the contour of the sphere, and when I move this way, I can line the corner of my brush up with the edge of the sphere so that I can stay inside those lines. And I'm gradually moving the paint away so that, like, I'm going over it and over it so that I can smooth out any brush strokes that I don't want and smooth out any thicker paint. Now, if right now I'm not super concerned about blending, you need your paint to be wet if you're going to blend it. So for example, if I was going to be making it darker right here and I wanted the change to be gradual, both of these would need to be wet while I was painting. But I know that the first amount of paint that's going on this sphere is going to be so thin, I'm going to have to probably do a second layer anyway. So if it doesn't completely blend, it's all right. Now, so let's say I've got a darker blue here and I've got a line here. If I want to start working on trying to blend it, I'm just going to scoop more white, try to get it back to that lighter shade. And then I'm going to come back over here to this lighter area. Now that blue is still wet, so now I can paint right over that area where they meet and blend them together. So with painting, there's a lot of reworking. So I might paint this area and then I paint the area beside it and then I paint that area again because I'm still trying to blend all of the colors together. All right, so I'm ready for it to start getting a little bit darker to the right, so I'm going to add more blue. And I'm going to go ahead and fill this in because I can make it darker by adding blue on top of this in a minute, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm trying to also paint along the contours of the sphere. So the sphere is round right here. So I'm trying to make my brush strokes follow that form, that round form. That way, if some of my brush strokes show later, it follows the form, that form of that sphere. All right, so now we can see these aren't blending together very well. So I'm going to go back in with some white and see if I can go back into this area. So you're just going to go back and forth until things are blending the way that you want. Now, it's hard, especially with acrylic paint, to not have any brush strokes showing. I don't mind seeing a little bit of brush strokes, especially if they follow the form. Sometimes the mark making can be interesting, so if you have some of those brush strokes showing, it's really not a big deal. but you can go back and forth until you get them covered up the way you want them covered up. So at this point, I've got mostly the sphere how I want it, except I don't have any really dark shadows and I don't have any bright highlights. So let's work on getting those in. I'm gonna wipe this paint off on my towel. When you do this, if you're ready to like switch colors or completely change colors, I wipe my paint off. I know I'm still using like a blue, but if I was gonna completely switch colors, you would rinse it and then you would wipe it again. So you see how I'm wiping it on the brush like this? I can even kind of twist the paintbrush on here to get more water or paint off. Do not crumple it. You start crumpling your paper towel, you're gonna get wrinkles of like, it's gonna wrinkle up and it's gonna get more paint all over the paper towel, it's gonna get paint all over the handle of the brush, then your hands are gonna get paint on it holding the brush and it's gonna be messy. So I try to use this and I gradually work my way down, and then if I need to put another piece of paper towel on top, I do. So I'm gonna work on that highlight here. That's mostly white. And I'm just gonna kind of tap that in right here. That's the highlight that I'm looking at. Now, depending on how much you want to blend that in, that's when I'll start going back into my light blue and I'll work that in around it. And I'll start blending that gradient back out into my sphere. So I'm going back and forth with the lighter color and the darker color, back and forth. Now I'm going to start putting in that darker shadow. So this is where if you're ready to be a little bit more advanced, sometimes you can find color in shadows and color in highlights separate from what the local color is. So let me talk about local color while I'm painting this real quick. This sphere is blue. That means its local color is blue. But sometimes you will see color in the highlight or in the shadow of an object that is different from its local color. So I'm looking at this shadow, there might actually be a little bit of green in there mixed with the blue, so it's more of a bluish green. That is something that you guys can look for if you get more advanced in painting and you're trying to paint shadows and highlights. Look to see first if it's warm or cool. Is it a warm highlight or a cool highlight? Is it a warm shadow or a cool shadow? Then see if you can figure out what color is mixed into that shadow. For right now though, we're just gonna use straight blue and white and black, so monochromatic. So I'm gonna start trying to work in this darker shadow that's up here at the top. So what I think I want to do is get it how dark I want so I know what I'm working with. So I'm mixing blue and black together now. So that means I'm starting with the blue. I'm going to use another area on my palette for mixing. I'll use this. I'm just going to dip a little corner. I did not need to get that much black. I really didn't. That was too much. So I think that is what I'm looking at for my shadow. That's what I'm wanting. So now I'm going to work from that and start trying to blend that in to the rest of my sphere. Well, this is now dry, so I got to go back in with that same shade if I'm going to be able to blend it. So I'm going to start gradually lightening it. And trying to paint it before it dries so that I can blend into that shade. Sometimes like I've got too much dark paint on my brush, so I need to wipe it off quickly and go back in and get some new paint. And you can be in this game of back and forth for a good long while before you get it how you want it. It just takes practice. What I did was I had too much paint loaded on my paintbrush, so I wiped some of it off. When you're going between the tints and the shades, so the light areas and the dark areas, you have to be careful if you've got black mixed in your paintbrush if you start moving backwards, because when you've got black already mixed in your paintbrush and then you try to put white and blue on it, then really what you're doing is mixing gray in, and that's going to look a little bit duller because white and black make gray. So you'll have to rinse the black off and go back to just your blue and white. Okay, so I'm happy with the sphere at this point. So now I'm going to work in the background. So the background is just different shades of gray. And to make gray, we are using white and black. So if this were dry, I could mix right on top of it, but it's still a little bit wet, so I'm going to find other places on my palette to mix. So I'm trying to decide, do I want to start with this side and move to the right, this side and move to the left? Do I want to start with this? It really doesn't matter. I think I want to start here and work my way out maybe. So, okay, I'm about to break the rule I just told you not to break. We're mixing white and black together to make gray. Usually I would start with the white and then add the black to it, but I'm gonna make this gray right here, and that gray is almost black, so I am gonna start with that black first. All of these decisions that I'm making, this shows critical thinking. You are constantly thinking when you're painting. You're constantly making decisions. What color do I get first? How do I make that color? Where do I apply it? What should I do to make it change from light to dark? You're making decisions all the time. You have to be focused. So I'm gonna put the black there. I'm gonna get a scoop of white. So now I've got a really dark gray. If your paint is not dragging well on your paper, meaning it's like, it's just not smooth enough, you can always get a little bit of water and mix it in your paint to make it drag better. So you could either use the very tip part of your brush, this brush, or it might be smart for this part of the shadow to use that round brush because it's got a point to it. So I'm gonna put it up underneath my sphere right here and gradually pull it out. I'm gonna dip it in the water, get that a little bit watery. and be real careful not to go over your sphere. If you do, you can always go back in with blue and cover, like paint covers paint. You can always go back in with your blue and go back and forth. So you can work your background and your foreground back and forth, just like you saw me do with the sphere, getting it light and dark and light and dark. But I'm trying to save myself some time later. All right, I got that hard part done, so I'm gonna go back to my bigger brush. It's good if you're gonna set your brush down to rinse it off and then lay it down. Also, I like to lay my brushes down here. Like if you lay it here, you're gonna just lay your handle on top of all that wet paint. So I'm gonna put it over here to keep the handle clean. So now I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna mix a little more white paint because that shadow starts to diffuse. See how it gets lighter as it moves away from the sphere? So I'm gonna start making it lighter. And you'll notice when you're painting shapes other than this later, some of our colors are thinner than others. Like our red and our yellow are very thin paints. Our white, you would think it would be thin because it's a light color, but our white is pretty thick. So when you paint like with red on your paper, you can see through your paper and you can see all your brush strokes. When you're painting, so you definitely need more layers if you're using red. All right, so this is what I don't want to see. See how I can see all 3 times that I painted here, this one, this one, this one? I want you to do what you can to blend those together. If they're still wet, you can wipe your paintbrush off and sometimes just kind of go over them like this to blend them. It's dry already, so I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to have to do that push and pull that you saw me do over there. Sometimes it's easier to do that if the paint has a little bit of water in it, like it's a little watery. You can't really do that with your first layer because that would be way too thin, but you can get water in the paint for like layers that go on top of other layers. So these 2 are still wet, so I'm going to wipe off my brush and I'm going to blend that line together. All right, for the background, I'm going to start on the left and move to the right because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you may want to start on the on the right and move to the left. That's just so you're not sticking your hand right in all the wet paint. So I'm going to start over here. Is this dry yet? This is kind of dry and it's not so wet that I might get a little bit of blue mixed in, but I'm not worried about it. And I want a bigger space to mix paint, so I'm going to do it in the middle. So I started with white, but it's a dark gray, so I can add like a decent amount of black to it. So I'm scooping. I'll scoop some more. All right, so now I'm gonna do this area over here. You don't need to paint all the way up to the edge for this. If I wanted to paint all the way up to the edge, I would get like a piece of cardboard or a scrap piece of paper and put it up underneath that so I could just paint right off without worrying about getting paint on the table. So for this area right up to the sphere, you don't want to go up there with a big glob of paint on your brush like this because then you can't control where it goes better. So I now have a glob here, so I can gradually like paint a little bit closer. And now I can paint right up to that edge, very slowly and very carefully. All right, as it's moving away to the right and down here, it gets a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start mixing a little bit of white as I move across. And if I'm quick, it might blend naturally. With acrylic, if you're super, super fast, you can blend as you go before it dries. That's the good thing about oil paint. That's why I really love oil painting. It stays wet on the canvas for a lot longer, and you have a lot more time to blend. So I'm adding white as I move across. So at this point, I can get a little bit of water and kind of, you don't want too much water, so like you could dip it in here and you could wipe some of it off on your paper towel. But sometimes you can get it to blend just with water. You can try that out. It helps blend a little bit once you've got enough paint on there. Or you can have an area over here that's a little bit darker and have an area that's a little bit lighter, and just keep going back and forth with that push and pull, like darker, lighter, until you get everything blended like how you want it. It might actually help if I had a bigger brush for this area, but I'm just gonna go ahead and use this one. Sometimes I can get it to blend well if I'm just very careful and lightly touch my paintbrush over it when it's not covered with a bunch of paint. If you guys are trying to hide some of these brush strokes and you're struggling, a bigger paintbrush might be helpful to get one that's a little bit wider. All right, so it's really light up underneath this. We're gonna go in and blend that in better in a minute. We're just gonna try to get the background covered first. Don't spend as much time on your background trying to get it perfectly smoothed out. I kind of want to see if you can make your brush strokes look interesting too. So like if you've got, you can see that it's it goes back and it like goes from dark to light. It's not completely seamless, but there's not a line. It's not like, here's where it gets lighter, here's where it gets lighter. I'm trying to pay attention to what I do with my brush strokes so I can tell you. I guess my pattern is kind of like, it's almost like X's. I'm like diagonal, diagonal, and then I'll switch, and then sometimes I just kind of do little swirls on top to just hide the brush strokes so that you can see that there's been marks made, but it's not like, it's a little bit hidden, I guess. So I'm trying to get the whole background covered and kind of blended mostly in a decent way. And then I'm gonna go back in and see if I can clean up this shadow right here if I need to. I'm trying to get this glob off the side of my paintbrush. When you paint right up to an edge, look carefully, make sure you don't have like a blob hanging off the edge of your paintbrush that's gonna mess that up. It's gonna go over your line. I really should totally have a bigger brush right now. All right, so now what I'm thinking about, critical thinking again. I've got this area here. I gotta figure out, because that's a really dark spot and a really light spot. It's easier to make it go gradually, but I've got to kind of diffuse that line. Like here's a hard crisp line, here's the diffused line. I have to figure out, how am I gonna get that diffused line? Ooh, dry piece of paint. How am I gonna get that diffused line here? And this is a good thing to know how to do, because if you can do a hard crisp line, you can paint things that are in focus. And if you can do a diffused line, then you can change your focus to make things look like out of focus or farther away in a painting, which is a good skill to have. So I'm gonna start putting a darker color here. I need to get everything painted right up to the sphere first before I try to blend everything in. Get that clean, crisp line in there. And then I can focus on trying to diffuse this. All right, so now we're diffusing. All right, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I'm gonna try to figure it out as I go. I'll try to tell you what I'm thinking about while I'm doing it. So I got 3 values right now. Now I'm gonna try to go over this line, and I'm really just going over it with kind of a watered down paintbrush. I'm wiping most of the water off over here because I don't want like a puddle. I'm seeing if I can diffuse that with water, and if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. I'm getting it a little bit, not how I want it. So now I'm gonna go with some light paint, see if I can bring that in. And I'm tapping it lighter and lighter as I go up so that the paintbrush isn't totally covering that area. Oh, and I tapped it harder with some lighter, so I gotta figure out how to blend this out. So I'm blending that out. All right, now I think I probably need to get it a little bit darker over here. Ooh, not that dark. I'm gonna wipe some of the paint off because I don't want a loaded paintbrush. Let's see where we're at. What color is that? Okay. I'm gonna kind of tap that in there gently, and I'm doing a really, really small amount of paint. I wiped most of the paint off. And I'm just gonna keep going back and forth until it works. All right, I'm getting kind of a diffused line now. That's sort of what I want. I want this darker part to come down more. Let's see. And it's hard because I don't have this color anymore. So I'm just gonna, it would be impossible to have me make that exact shade. So we just gotta try to make something similar and work it down. Now I know why Bob Ross talks about crazy stuff. It's hard to talk while you're painting. I don't think I'm making sense at all, but hopefully you guys know what I'm doing. See, now I can't paint because I'm talking. All right, I'll be quiet. But you see, there's very much, even if you've been painting for years, there's very much, okay, I go back over this, go back over that. That's not working. Let me get something lighter. Let me get something darker. And right now, we're really just working monochromatic. We're working white, black, and one color. This all gets even more complicated when you start introducing mixed colors. So like if my background was, if I was mixing a yellow and a green and a brown, because I wanted like a yellowish greenish brown, and trying to blend that into something else, like it makes everything even more complicated. So it's good to start practicing with these basic colors first. Then you can start introducing that later. All right, we're getting to the point like, I'm okay. It's not just like the picture, but I'm getting to the point where I'm okay with it. I'm happy with it. I'm about to stop. It's a diffused line, we see it. Now, do I need to do anything over here? I mean, this is a practice. I'd be fine if you turned it in like this, but if you wanted to try to blend this in better, you could go back into this and start working on how that shadow looks when it meets the background, and work on diffusing that a little bit, making it blend in a little bit. Like here, it's kind of a blurry line where it meets the background or where it meets the surface. So I'm bringing it up to kind of match that, and then I may put like a darker shadow in the middle while it's still wet. And I keep wiping paint off because the more paint I have blending into it, the harder it is to diffuse the shadow. These are just all things that you really have to think about the whole time you're working, which is why it's hard to listen to music with words or that you think about. Or like I listen to podcasts all the time, but there's sometimes when I'm painting that I gotta think too much to be able to listen to a podcast. I'm making decisions and I have to think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. All right, I'm getting to the point where I'm good enough with this for right now. So now it's time to clean up. I'm gonna take the camera over to the sink and show you what I want you to do with all of your supplies when you're cleaning up. I never use, no, I did use that brush. I rinsed it out. So I gotta wash both brushes with soap. So I'm gonna take this over there and show you what to do. Okay, we are going to clean up our stuff. We have the palette. So we do not rinse this paint down the sink. If we do, it dries up in the sink and then we have to clean out the filter more often. If you wanted to save these colors, you could put a plastic lid on top of this. You could keep this in your shelf and you could say these will stay wet for a few days. But without the lid on them, they dry up, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days, they'll completely dry up. So we set these on the side of the counter. If someone sees them on the counter and like, hey, I need that color, those are fair game. You can pick that up and use them. But if not, we wait for them to dry and then we just peel them out. So this one's ready to peel out. I can show you what it looks like. So, well, one of the colors is, they're not all ready. But if I kind of get my fingernail underneath that, you can just like pull it out when it's dry. All right, so what we're gonna do now is wash the paintbrushes. So I'll swish them in the water right here. Then there is paint inside, like deep inside there that you can't see. If it dries, it'll get hard, and once it hardens, it's really hard to loosen it and get it cleaned out. So what you're gonna do is, like I hold them in one hand, I get some of the dish soap, I put like a drop of dish soap. You don't need any more than that. And then you can kind of clean them both at the same time. You like massage the paintbrush like that, and you get the paint out of the middle of it. Never do it like this. Like, don't stir it around in your hand. That ruins the bristles of the brush. So you want to do it like that, and then you'll rinse it out while you're doing that underneath the faucet. With acrylic paint, you only need to do that one time, and that's probably fine if it wasn't loaded with paint before. With oil paint, you have to do that like multiple times to wash the paintbrushes out. So at this point, if you know where these go, like I have my brushes labeled. If you know where to put them away. If you don't, lay them over in the drying rack, and someone who does know will get them later.